The suburban Cleveland home buzzed with the controlled chaos of a birthday party for a 12-year-old girl. Pink and silver balloons bobbed against the popcorn ceiling while streamers crisscrossed the living room in elaborate patterns. Sarah Matthews, the birthday girl, held court among her friends, a cluster of preteens alternating between whispered secrets and explosive laughter. In the kitchen doorway stood Ellie Matthews, Sarah's 9-year-old sister, watching the celebration with complicated emotions swirling behind her careful smile. She wore the designated birthday helper badge their mother had created years ago, a well-intentioned attempt to include the non-celebrated sibling in the festivities. "Ellie, sweetie, can you bring the ice cream from the freezer?" her mother called from the dining room, where she was putting final touches on the birthday cake, a lavish 2-tiered creation covered in fondant stars and Sarah's name spelled out in purple icing. Ellie nodded, slipping away to the kitchen. Through the window above the sink, she could see her father in the backyard, taking a rare moment alone. Daniel Matthews stood with his back to the house, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing emphatically in the way it did when he was discussing something important. As Ellie retrieved the ice cream cartons from the freezer, she caught fragments of her father's conversation. Results, and appointment, and options. Words that meant little to her, but were spoken with an intensity that made her pause. Her father turned then, catching sight of Ellie through the window. His serious expression immediately softened into a smile, though something in his eyes remained distant, preoccupied. He waved, pointed to his phone, and mouthed 1 minute, before turning away again. The sound of her mother's voice calling everyone to the dining room pulled Ellie back to her duties. She carried the ice cream containers to the table just as Sarah and her friends swarmed in, drawn by the promise of cake and presents. "Make a wish, birthday girl," their mother exclaimed as she lit the 12 candles adorning the elaborate cake. Sarah closed her eyes dramatically, her face illuminated by the warm glow of birthday candles. With a theatrical intake of breath, she extinguished all 12 flames in one determined blow to the applause and cheers of her friends. No one noticed Ellie standing slightly apart from the celebration circle. No one except her father, who had slipped in quietly from the backyard, tucking his phone away with a finality that seemed significant somehow. As Sarah basked in the attention, accepting congratulations for her successful wish-making, Daniel Matthews reached quietly for the lighter. With a subtle movement, he relit a single candle on the far side of the cake. "Ellie," he said softly, his voice somehow cutting through the noise, "this one's for you." 20 years later, Ellie Matthews stood in the arrivals area of Cleveland Hopkins International Airport, watching travelers stream through the security gates. Her fingers absently twisted the thin gold band on her right hand, not a wedding ring, but a memento she'd worn since her father's funeral 11 years ago. "There she is!" A familiar voice cut through the airport noise. Sarah, now 32 and as commanding as ever, waved dramatically as she pulled a sleek carry-on behind her. "Sorry I'm late. Chicago weather is the absolute worst." The sisters embraced, an automatic gesture that felt both familiar and distant. Ellie noticed the new highlights in Sarah's hair, the designer label on her coat, the subtle scent of an expensive perfume. "You look great," Ellie said, meaning it despite the complicated emotions that always surfaced around her sister. "How was the flight?" "Bumpy. I had to take 2 calls in the bathroom because the merger paperwork needs signatures by tomorrow." Sarah checked her phone reflexively. "Mom at the house?" "Yes, she's finishing up the guest room. She's been cleaning for 3 days straight." As they walked toward the parking garage, Sarah kept up a steady stream of conversation about her job at the Chicago investment firm, her boyfriend Jason's recent promotion, the condo they were thinking of buying in Lincoln Park. Ellie listened, offering appropriate responses while navigating through traffic. "And you? Still at the community center?" Sarah asked finally, the question carrying an undercurrent that Ellie had learned to recognize over the years, a mixture of genuine interest and subtle judgment about her less prestigious career path. "Yes, we just got a new grant for the after-school arts program," Ellie replied, keeping her eyes on the road. "I'm developing a music therapy component for kids with trauma histories." "That's nice," Sarah said, already checking her phone again. "Very you." The drive to their childhood home in Shaker Heights took 30 minutes, filled with Sarah's updates and Ellie's careful navigation of conversational landmines. As they pulled into the driveway of the colonial-style house where they'd grown up, both sisters fell momentarily silent. "It always looks exactly the same," Sarah murmured, "like walking into a time capsule." Their mother, Margaret Matthews, appeared on the porch before they'd even closed the car doors. At 65, she remained elegant and energetic, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob, her movements purposeful as she welcomed her daughters with embraces and questions about the drive, the flight, whether they were hungry. Inside, the house indeed seemed preserved in amber. The same furniture, the same family photos lining the staircase, the same smell of lemon polish, and the vanilla candles their mother had always favored. "I've made up both your rooms," Margaret announced as they followed her inside. "And there's pot roast for dinner, Sarah's favorite. I thought we could eat early since you both must be tired." "Actually, I need to make some calls first," Sarah said, already heading upstairs with her suitcase. "Give me 30 minutes?" Margaret's smile flickered only slightly. "Of course, dear. Dinner whenever you're ready." Left alone with her mother in the kitchen, Ellie fell automatically into familiar patterns, washing lettuce for salad while Margaret checked the roast in the oven. "How is she really doing?" Ellie asked quietly when she was certain Sarah was out of earshot. Margaret paused, hands stilling on the oven door. "You know your sister, always moving too fast to feel anything too deeply. Has she talked about Dad at all? About tomorrow?" "Not directly," Margaret admitted, "but she agreed to come. That's something." Tomorrow would mark the 11th anniversary of Daniel Matthews's death. Unlike previous years when they'd acknowledged the day separately, Sarah usually with a brief phone call from Chicago, Ellie and her mother with a quiet visit to the cemetery, this year would be different. The hospital where Daniel had spent his final months was dedicating a new pediatric oncology wing in his name, honoring his substantial contributions to cancer research after his diagnosis. "I found more of Dad's journals in the attic last week," Margaret said, her voice carefully neutral. "I thought you both might want to look through them." Ellie nodded, remembering the leather-bound books her father had faithfully written in each evening, a habit he'd maintained even during his illness. After his death, they'd discovered dozens of journals spanning decades, some containing family memories, others filled with reflections on his life and work as a pediatrician. "I'm not sure Sarah will want to," Ellie said gently. "You know how she is about anything that brings back that time." Margaret sighed, arranging dinner rolls in a basket with methodical precision. She was 21 when he died, a grown woman, yet sometimes I think she's never really faced it. Not like you did, Ellie. Upstairs, they could hear Sarah's voice, the professional tone she used for work calls, confident and assertive. "We process things differently," Ellie said, defending her sister automatically even as familiar frustration stirred. "Always have." "Yes," Margaret agreed, her eyes drifting to the family photo on the refrigerator. Daniel with his arms around both daughters at Sarah's high school graduation. "Your father understood that better than anyone." The evening sun slanted through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the countertops. Ellie found herself remembering another kitchen, another time. Her father showing her how to relight candles that had been blown out, his voice gentle as he explained that sometimes everyone deserves their own moment to shine. "We should bring his favorite flowers tomorrow," Ellie said, returning to the present. "The yellow roses." Margaret smiled, a genuine expression that momentarily eased the tension lines around her eyes. "He would like that. And Ellie, I'm glad you're here. Both of you." From upstairs came the sound of Sarah's laughter, bright and sudden, a reminder that beneath the complications of family dynamics, some connections remained unbreakable. Dinner that evening unfolded with the careful choreography of a family accustomed to navigating emotional undercurrents. Sarah dominated the conversation with stories about her work, her friends in Chicago, the charity gala she'd helped organize last month. Margaret asked interested questions, while Ellie maintained the peace, offering the right comments at the right moments. "Remember how Dad used to time us?" Sarah asked suddenly, the non sequitur surprising both Ellie and their mother. "When we'd start talking too much at dinner, he'd pull out that ridiculous stopwatch and say, 2 minutes per Matthews, that's the rule." The memory hung in the air between them, unexpected and powerful. Margaret's eyes glistened briefly before she composed herself. "He called it Democratic dinner dialogue," Ellie added, smiling at the recollection. "Mom got extra time because she housed and fed the masses. He was always fair like that," Margaret said softly, making sure everyone had their moment. Sarah nodded, then just as quickly redirected the conversation to safer territory. Her boyfriend Jason's possible promotion, whether they should consider the Chicago suburbs instead of the city for their future home purchase. After dinner, Margaret produced a folder of information about the hospital dedication ceremony scheduled for the following afternoon. "They've asked if one of you would like to say a few words," she explained, sliding the folder across the table. "Nothing elaborate, just a brief family perspective on your father's legacy." Sarah stiffened almost imperceptibly. I'm not sure that's necessary. Won't the hospital director be speaking, and Dad's former colleagues? Yes, but they thought it would be meaningful to have family representation. Margaret's tone remained neutral, though Ellie could sense her disappointment. It's completely optional, of course. Ellie should do it, Sarah said, pushing her chair back slightly. She was always better with words, and she spent more time at the hospital with Dad anyway. The statement contained no explicit accusation, yet Ellie felt its weight. During their father's 18-month battle with pancreatic cancer, Ellie had deferred her graduate school plans to return home, helping care for him while Sarah continued her business school program in Chicago, visiting on weekends when she could. I'm happy to speak, Ellie said carefully, but it might mean more coming from both of us. Sarah's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, then stood. I need to take this. It's Jason. We can figure out the ceremony details in the morning, okay? After Sarah disappeared upstairs, Margaret began clearing the dishes with methodical movements that Ellie recognized as her mother's way of processing emotion. She's still running, Margaret observed quietly, rinsing plates at the sink, just like she did then. She handles things differently, Ellie replied, the familiar defense of her sister automatic after all these years. The hospital brings back difficult memories. Margaret turned, fixing her daughter with a knowing look. For all of us, Ellie. But at some point, we have to stop and face what we're running from. Later that evening, after Margaret had gone to bed, Ellie found herself drawn to her father's study, a room largely unchanged since his death. His medical textbooks still lined the shelves, family photos crowded his desk, and in the corner stood the old record player, where he'd introduced both daughters to his beloved jazz collection. She ran her fingers over album covers. Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk, remembering Sunday afternoons when he'd explain the structure of improvisation, the conversation between instruments. Couldn't sleep either? Sarah's voice from the doorway startled her. Just reminiscing, Ellie admitted, turning to find her sister leaning against the door frame, looking younger in sweatpants and an old Northwestern t-shirt, her professional armor temporarily set aside. Sarah entered hesitantly, as if crossing a boundary. It smells exactly the same in here. His aftershave or something. Sandalwood, Ellie confirmed. Mom still puts it in that diffuser on special occasions. Sarah picked up a framed photo from the desk. Their father with both girls at the lake house, his arms around their shoulders, all three squinting into the summer sun. She was 16 in the picture, Ellie 13. That was the summer before. Sarah trailed off, setting the frame down carefully. Before they found the first tumor, Ellie finished. Yes. The sisters stood in silence, the weight of shared history settling between them. I have something to show you, Ellie said finally, moving to the bookshelf where she'd noticed one of their father's journals earlier. I found this when I was helping Mom clean last week. It's from your senior year of high school. She opened the leather-bound book to a marked page, handing it to Sarah, who took it with visible reluctance. Sarah received her acceptance to Northwestern today, Sarah read aloud, her voice growing softer as she continued. Her face, when she opened the letter, pure joy and vindication. I've never been prouder. Ellie made a congratulations banner and hung it from the staircase without being asked. Always thinking of others, my younger daughter. Always making room for her sister's light to shine. Sarah looked up, her expression complicated. He noticed everything, didn't he? Everything, Ellie confirmed. Even the things we thought no one saw. Sarah closed the journal carefully, running her hand over its worn cover. Tomorrow's going to be hard. It wasn't a question, but Ellie answered anyway. Yes, but we'll get through it together. Sarah nodded, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Fragile but real, a momentary lowering of defenses that had been carefully maintained for years. We should try to sleep, Sarah said, moving toward the door, then pausing. Thanks for showing me that, Ellie. After Sarah left, Ellie remained in the study, surrounded by echoes of her father's presence. On impulse, she selected one of his favorite records, Kind of Blue, and placed it carefully on the turntable. As the first notes filled the room, she closed her eyes, remembering her father explaining that sometimes the spaces between the notes were as important as the notes themselves. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, in the quiet of the study with Miles Davis playing softly, Ellie felt closer to her father than she had in years. The following morning brought steady rain, droplets streaming down the windows of the Matthews family home as the three women prepared for the dedication ceremony. They moved around each other with practiced care, the kitchen a neutral zone where coffee was poured, toast was buttered, and conversation remained safely focused on logistics. The ceremony starts at 2, Margaret reminded them, consulting the printed schedule she'd placed on the refrigerator. They've asked family to arrive by 1:30 for photographs. I have those files you wanted, Ellie told Sarah, sliding a USB drive across the table. Dad's favorite photos from the lake house summers. Thought you might want them for your Chicago place. Sarah nodded her thanks, tucking the drive into her purse. I should check in with the office before we go. Some client issues I need to handle. As Sarah disappeared into the living room with her laptop, Margaret gave Ellie a meaningful look. Have you written something for the ceremony? Just some notes, Ellie admitted. It's hard to distill Dad's life into a few minutes. You'll find the right words, Margaret assured her, squeezing her daughter's hand briefly. You always do. At noon, as they were preparing to leave, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Margaret answered it to find a courier holding a package requiring signature. Special delivery for the Matthews family, the young man explained, handing over a medium-sized box after Margaret signed his electronic pad. The 3 women gathered in the living room as Margaret opened the unexpected package. Inside lay a letter on hospital stationery and a polished wooden box with a brass plaque reading, Daniel Matthews, M.D., remembered in love. Margaret unfolded the letter, reading aloud, Dear Matthews family, in preparation for today's dedication ceremony, we wanted to share something that has been safeguarded at our facility since Dr. Matthews' passing. Per his specific instructions, this box was to be delivered to his family on the day the pediatric oncology wing was officially dedicated. With deepest respect, Catherine Wilson, hospital administrator. Sarah and Ellie exchanged confused glances as their mother carefully opened the wooden box. Inside rested a USB drive labeled For My Family and 3 sealed envelopes, each bearing a name, Margaret, Sarah, and Ellie. He prepared this? Sarah asked, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. Before he died? Apparently, Margaret replied, lifting the USB drive with trembling fingers. Your father was always thinking ahead. Ellie moved to the television, connecting the USB drive to the port. After a moment of technical adjustments, the screen flickered to life, revealing Daniel Matthews sitting in his hospital bed, looking thin but alert, dressed in a button-down shirt rather than a hospital gown, his hair neatly combed despite its sparseness from chemotherapy. Hello, my dear ones, he began, his voice steady despite his obviously weakened state. If you're watching this, then 2 things have happened. I've been gone for some time and the Pediatric Oncology Wing project has finally come to fruition. Margaret sank onto the sofa, one hand covering her mouth. Sarah remained standing, arms crossed protectively across her chest, while Ellie knelt by the television, unable to look away from her father's image. I'm recording this about 2 weeks before what the doctors and I both recognize will likely be the end of my journey, Daniel continued. I wanted to leave you with some thoughts that might be difficult to express in the moment, but that I hope will provide comfort and clarity with the perspective that time brings. He adjusted his position slightly, wincing with the effort, then smiled directly into the camera. First, to my beloved Margaret, you have been my heart's compass for 40 years. The envelopes contain personal messages, but I want to say publicly what you already know privately. Every good thing I ever accomplished was possible because of your strength, your wisdom, and your unfailing love. Margaret nodded silently, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, my firstborn, Daniel continued, his expression softening. Your determination and brilliance have always amazed me. From the moment you entered the world, you've approached life with a fierce independence that both challenged and inspired me. I've watched you build walls to protect yourself from pain, a strategy I understand all too well. My hope is that you'll find the courage to let those walls down sometimes, to allow yourself to feel fully, even when it hurts. Sarah's carefully maintained composure began to crack, her breathing becoming uneven as she listened to her father's gentle assessment. And Ellie, my youngest. Daniel shifted his gaze slightly, as if looking directly at her. You've always been the family's emotional center, the one who notices, who connects, who makes space for others' feelings even at the expense of your own. I've worried that your compassion might come at too high a personal cost. Remember that you too deserve the light. He paused, taking a sip of water from a cup beside the bed. Now, there's something important I need to tell all of you. Something I've kept private until now because I wanted to protect you from additional pain during my illness. Daniel's expression became more serious, his doctor's demeanor emerging. My cancer wasn't the random occurrence we discussed. For the past 20 years, I've been monitoring a genetic mutation that significantly increased my cancer risk. A mutation that runs in my paternal line. The three women froze, the implications of his words sinking in slowly. Both of my daughters have a 50% chance of carrying this same mutation, Daniel continued, his voice gentle but direct. I've arranged comprehensive genetic counseling and testing through my colleagues at the hospital, available whenever you feel ready to pursue this information. The revelation hung in the air, a seismic shift in their understanding of not just the past, but potentially the future. I chose not to share this during my illness because I wanted you to live without that shadow for as long as possible, Daniel explained. But knowledge is power, and this information could be crucial for your health decisions going forward. He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes conveying the depth of his concern and love. This is not a burden I wanted to leave you, but it is a truth that might help you protect yourselves in ways I no longer can. The living room remained silent after Daniel's video ended, the three women frozen in their positions, as if physically struck by his revelations. Rain continued pattering against the windows, the mundane sound at odds with the monumental shift that had just occurred in their understanding. Margaret was the first to move, reaching for the remote to pause the video before more could play. I had no idea, she whispered, her voice barely audible. All those checkups he insisted on, the lifestyle changes after 40, he never told me. Sarah paced the perimeter of the room, her movements sharp and agitated. This is exactly like him, she said, anger edging into her voice. Making unilateral decisions about what we should or shouldn't know, playing God with information that directly affects our lives. Sarah, Ellie began, but her sister cut her off with a slashing gesture. No, Ellie, don't defend this. He knew for 20 years, while I was making life plans, career decisions, considering whether to have children someday. Sarah's voice rose, years of complicated feelings toward their father surfacing. He had no right to withhold this. He was trying to protect us, Ellie offered, though her own thoughts swirled chaotically around the implications of her father's disclosure. By lying? By omission? Sarah demanded. That's not protection, that's control. Margaret stood, her movements deliberately calm despite the emotion evident in her eyes. We need to pause this discussion. The ceremony is in less than 2 hours, and we have obligations to fulfill. Obligations? Sarah repeated incredulously. We just learned information that could fundamentally change our lives, and you're worried about a ceremony. Your father worked for years to establish this pediatric oncology wing, Margaret replied, her voice gaining strength. Children with cancer will receive better care because of his efforts. Whatever your feelings about his personal decisions, that legacy deserves to be honored today. The two women faced each other across the living room, the tension between them palpable. Ellie felt the familiar pressure of peacekeeper settling onto her shoulders. Mom's right about the timing, she said carefully. We can't process everything right now, but Sarah's feelings are valid too. She looked between her mother and sister. What if we attend the ceremony as planned, fulfill our commitments to the hospital and Dad's colleagues, and then come back here to watch the rest of the video and read his letters? Together? Margaret nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. Sarah remained rigid for a moment longer before her shoulders slumped slightly. Fine, but I'm not speaking at the ceremony. I can't stand up there and deliver platitudes about Dad's wisdom and foresight when I'm this angry with him. No one's asking you to be insincere, Margaret assured her. Your presence is enough. The drive to Cleveland Memorial Hospital took place in strained silence, each woman lost in her own thoughts. As they approached the massive medical complex where Daniel had both worked and died, Ellie felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the physical manifestation of grief that had lessened over the years, but never completely disappeared. The newly constructed pediatric oncology wing stood separate from the main hospital building, a modern structure of glass and warm-toned brick designed to feel less institutional and more welcoming to its young patients. In the circular drive before the entrance, hospital staff had erected a tent to shield the dedication ceremony from the persistent rain. As the Matthews women entered, they were immediately greeted by Catherine Wilson, the hospital administrator whose letter had accompanied the mysterious package. Mrs. Matthews, Sarah, Ellie, thank you for coming despite the weather, she said, clasping each of their hands warmly. Dr. Matthews would be so proud to see this day finally realized. Thank you for sending the package, Margaret replied, her social grace automatic despite her inner turmoil. It was unexpected. Catherine nodded, her expression compassionate. Your husband was very specific about the timing. He entrusted it to me personally during his final week. She hesitated, then added, There's someone else here who was hoping to speak with you before the ceremony. If you'll follow me? Curious despite their emotional upheaval, the three women followed Catherine through the lobby of the new wing, past colorful murals and child-sized furniture arranged in welcoming clusters. She led them to a small conference room where a man in his early 30s stood as they entered. "This is Dr. Jason Kelly," Catherine introduced him. "He was one of the last residents your husband mentored before his illness." The young doctor stepped forward, his expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Thank you for meeting with me. Dr. Matthews was more than just a mentor to me. He fundamentally changed the course of my life and medical career." "It's nice to meet you," Margaret said automatically, though her confusion was evident. "Did you work with Daniel on the oncology wing planning?" "Not exactly," Dr. Kelly replied. "I'm here because Dr. Matthews asked me to be available to your family today specifically. I'm one of the hospital's genetic specialists." Understanding dawned on the women's faces simultaneously. "He arranged for you to answer our questions," Ellie said softly. "About the mutation he mentioned." Dr. Kelly nodded. "Whenever you're ready, today or in the future, I have all your father's medical information and the resources to guide you through testing decisions, implications, and preventative options." Sarah, who had remained silent since entering the hospital, finally spoke. "Did you know my father personally, beyond the professional relationship?" "Yes," Dr. Kelly said, his expression softening. "He became something of a father figure to me during my residency. We spoke often during his treatments." "Then maybe you can tell me," Sarah continued, her voice tight with controlled emotion, "why he would keep something this important from his family for 20 years. As a doctor, how did he justify that?" Dr. Kelly considered the question carefully before answering. "He struggled with that decision constantly. I can't speak for him, but I can tell you what he told me during one of our last conversations." The three women waited, united in their need to understand. He said, "I made the choice a father makes, not the choice a doctor makes. Right or wrong, I wanted my daughters to live without fear for as long as possible. Every candle I could keep lit for them, I did." The dedication ceremony proceeded under the white tent, sheltered from the persistent rain that seemed to mirror the family's emotional state. Hospital administrators, board members, and Daniel's former colleagues delivered speeches highlighting his contributions to pediatric medicine and cancer research. A large portrait of Daniel in his white coat stood on an easel beside the podium, his kind eyes and slight smile captured perfectly by the artist. Ellie sat between her mother and sister in the front row, her prepared remarks folded in her lap, largely forgotten as her mind continued processing her father's revelations. When the hospital director announced her name, she moved to the podium almost automatically, unfolding her notes with hands that trembled slightly. Looking out at the assembled crowd, medical professionals who had worked alongside her father, donors who had funded the new wing, even former patients who had come to honor the doctor who had cared for them, Ellie made a split-second decision to set aside her prepared comments. "My father believed in truth," she began, her voice stronger than she expected. "As a doctor, he pursued it through science and research. As a father, he taught us its value, even when it was difficult to hear." From the front row, she saw Sarah's head lift, attention sharpening. "Today, we're dedicating this wing not just to a brilliant physician, but to a man who understood that healing involves more than medical intervention. It requires compassion, presence, and sometimes protecting others from suffering before they're ready to bear it." Ellie paused, gathering her thoughts. "My father kept a journal throughout his life. In one entry from when I was 9 years old, he wrote about a moment at my sister's birthday party. Sarah had blown out all her candles, and everyone was focused on her celebration. Dad noticed me standing a little apart from the group, and quietly relit one candle just for me." She looked directly at Sarah now, whose expression had softened unexpectedly. He wrote, "Sometimes the greatest act of love is ensuring everyone has their moment to shine, their wish to make, their own light in the darkness." This oncology wing represents that philosophy, creating a space where children facing unimaginable challenges can find their own light, their own moments of joy and normalcy amid difficulty. Ellie gestured toward the ribbon stretched across the entrance to the new wing. "My father couldn't be here today to see his vision realized, but his spirit infuses every aspect of this facility, from the research laboratories pursuing genetic treatments, to the playrooms designed to bring moments of childhood joy to patients, to the family support services that recognize healing happens within a community of care." Her voice grew steadier as she continued. "In his final months, my father shared something with me that I've carried ever since. He said, 'Ellie, the hardest decisions I've made weren't about treatment protocols or research priorities. They were about when to fight against suffering and when to make space for it as a necessary part of growth. Margaret wiped tears quietly from her cheeks, while Sarah sat perfectly still, her gaze fixed on her sister. This wing will be a place where that delicate balance is honored, where medical expertise confronts suffering directly, but where the human need for hope, for autonomy, for dignity is equally respected. That is my father's true legacy, and one we're privileged to help continue. As Ellie returned to her seat, Sarah reached for her hand, a brief, tight squeeze that communicated more than words could have in that moment. The ribbon cutting followed, with Margaret invited to wield the ceremonial scissors. As the crowd applauded, hospital staff opened the doors to the new wing, inviting attendees to tour the facilities. During the reception that followed, the three Matthews women moved through the crowd together, accepting condolences and congratulations with gracious nods. When they reached a quieter corner near a large aquarium designed to soothe young patients, Dr. Kelly approached them again. "That was a beautiful speech," he told Ellie. "Dr. Matthews would have been moved." "Thank you," Ellie replied. "There's so much I wish I could have said, but we're still processing," Sarah finished for her, surprising both her sister and mother with her directness. "Dr. Kelly, I have questions about this genetic mutation. Specific questions." The young doctor nodded. "Of course. Would you like to sit down somewhere private?" "Not just yet," Margaret interjected gently. "We agreed to finish watching Daniel's video together first, to hear everything he wanted to tell us. Then we can make decisions about next steps." Dr. Kelly seemed to understand the family dynamics at play. "I'll be available whenever you're ready. Your father set up a special consultation arrangement. You can contact me directly. No need to go through hospital channels." He handed each woman his card, then added, "There's something else I thought you might want to see today. If you have a few minutes before you leave?" Curious, they followed him through the winding corridors of the new wing, past treatment rooms equipped with state-of-the-art technology, cheerful murals depicting woodland scenes, and comfortable family waiting areas. He stopped finally before a door marked "Reflection Room." "This was your father's specific request," Dr. Kelly explained, opening the door to reveal a peaceful space designed for meditation and quiet contemplation. A wall of windows overlooked a garden courtyard, while comfortable seating and soft lighting created a sanctuary-like atmosphere. On the central wall hung a large photograph that caused all three women to catch their breath simultaneously. It showed Daniel Matthews sitting cross-legged on a hospital floor, surrounded by young cancer patients. His head was completely bald from his own chemotherapy, matching several of the children. All were laughing as Daniel appeared to be telling a story, his hands raised in animated gesture. Beneath the photograph, a plaque bore an inscription: "Dr. Daniel Matthews Memorial Reflection Room. Every person deserves their own light in the darkness." "He chose this photograph himself," Dr. Kelly said quietly. "It was taken about 3 months before he died, during one of his final visits to the pediatric ward as a doctor rather than a patient." The three women stood in silence, absorbing the image of Daniel, physically diminished by illness, but radiating the compassionate energy that had defined him. "He never told us he was still seeing patients," Margaret whispered. "We thought he'd stopped working months earlier." "He couldn't stay away," Dr. Kelly explained. "Even when he barely had the strength to walk, he'd come read stories to the children, tell jokes, listen to their fears. He said they understood him in ways even his closest colleagues couldn't. They spoke the same language of uncertainty and hope." Sarah moved closer to the photograph, studying her father's face with new eyes. "He looks happy," she said, surprise evident in her voice, even knowing what was coming. "He was," Dr. Kelly confirmed. Those moments with the children brought him profound joy, even at his sickest. He called it candlelighting, creating moments of brightness that might outlast the darkness. Ellie felt something shift inside her, not a resolution to the complicated emotions stirred by her father's video revelation, but a widening of perspective that made space for both his human flaws and his extraordinary compassion. "Thank you for showing us this," she told Dr. Kelly. "It helps to see him this way." As they left the hospital an hour later, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight broke through clouds, illuminating puddles on the parking lot pavement. The three women walked to their car in thoughtful silence, each carrying new pieces of Daniel with them. His genetic legacy, his medical contributions, his philosophical approach to suffering, and now, this image of joy in the midst of his own illness. "Let's go home," Margaret said simply as they reached the car. "We have more to learn from Daniel today." Back at the house, the three women moved with silent purpose. Margaret preparing tea in the kitchen, Sarah changing from her formal clothes into comfortable loungewear, Ellie reconnecting the USB drive to the television. The ordinary actions provided a necessary buffer, a few moments to prepare for whatever Daniel's remaining message might contain. They gathered in the living room, tea mugs in hand, the wooden box from the hospital placed on the coffee table between them. The 3 sealed envelopes remained untouched, each woman seemingly hesitant to be the first to break the seal on such private communications. "Should we watch the rest of the video first?" Ellie suggested, remote control poised. Margaret nodded. "Yes, let's hear everything he wanted to tell us together before we read our individual letters." Sarah, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since leaving the hospital, finally spoke. "I want to apologize for my reaction earlier. I was shocked and angry, but that's no excuse for—" "No apologies necessary," Margaret interrupted gently. "Your feelings are entirely valid, Sarah. This is overwhelming for all of us." Ellie pressed play, and Daniel's image reappeared on screen. He looked more tired than in the first segment, suggesting this portion had been recorded later in the same day. "I imagine my disclosure about the genetic mutation has come as a shock," he began, his medical training evident in his direct approach. "I want to explain my reasoning, though I know it may not alleviate your anger or confusion." He shifted slightly, wincing with pain before continuing. "When I first discovered I carried the BRCA2 mutation 20 years ago, genetic testing and counseling were in their infancy. The protocols for family disclosure weren't well established, and the preventative options were far more limited than they are today." Daniel paused, taking a sip of water. Sarah was 12, Ellie 9. "I made the decision then that I wouldn't burden children with information that could only cause fear when no immediate action was necessary. As they grew older, the right moment to share this information never seemed to arrive." In the living room, Sarah's posture remained rigid, though her expression had softened slightly. "Then came my diagnosis," Daniel continued on screen. "By then, both girls were establishing their adult lives. Sarah was finishing business school, Ellie beginning her graduate program. Sharing the genetic information during my illness felt cruel, adding the weight of their potential future risk to the immediate crisis of my cancer." He looked directly into the camera, his doctor's detachment momentarily replaced by a father's vulnerability. "I told myself I was protecting them. In retrospect, I recognize I was also protecting myself from difficult conversations, from their fear, from the guilt of passing on this genetic liability." Margaret reached for Ellie's hand, squeezing it gently. "What I want you all to understand is this. My silence was never about keeping you from information you deserved. It was about timing, finding the moment when knowledge would empower rather than devastate." Daniel's expression grew more serious. "Now for the practical aspects. The specific mutation I carry, and that you may carry, Sarah and Ellie, is in the BRCA2 gene. It significantly increases risk for several cancers, including pancreatic, which ultimately took my life. However, medical science has advanced remarkably in the past decade." He gestured to something off camera, and the view briefly shifted to show medical documents. "I've arranged comprehensive genetic counseling and testing through Dr. Kelly, whom you've presumably met by now. The testing process is simple, a blood sample, but the emotional implications require professional support." Daniel leaned forward, his intensity palpable even through the screen. "Here is what I want you both to understand. Knowledge is not destiny. If you carry this mutation, it doesn't mean you'll develop cancer. It means you have information I didn't have until too late. Information that allows for enhanced screening, preventative measures, and potentially life-saving interventions." In the living room, Sarah spoke quietly. "He's right about that. One of my business school friends tested positive for a BRCA mutation. She had preventative surgery last year." Ellie nodded, grateful for her sister's measured response. On screen, Daniel continued. "The decision to test is entirely personal. Some prefer not to know. I respect that choice, though as both a doctor and your father, I hope you'll choose information over uncertainty." He paused, seeming to gather strength before continuing. "Now, there's another aspect of my medical history I need to share, one that informed my approach to my own treatment and ultimately to the design of this oncology wing." Daniel's expression shifted, becoming more reflective. "When I was diagnosed, many colleagues encouraged aggressive treatment approaches, experimental protocols, clinical trials, maximum intervention. As both a doctor and a patient, I made the controversial decision to prioritize quality of remaining life over quantity." He gestured to the room around him, his hospital suite where he'd spent his final months. "I chose to spend my energy on projects that would outlast me, designing this oncology wing, establishing research protocols, mentoring young doctors like Jason Kelly, and most importantly, creating meaningful final memories with my family. Daniel's eyes grew moist, his clinical detachment slipping. The medical establishment often views death as failure. Throughout my career, I came to see it differently, not as something to battle against at all costs, but as a transition to approach with intention and grace when the time comes. The three women sat perfectly still, absorbing his words. Which brings me to the most difficult part of this message, Daniel continued, his voice steady despite his evident emotion. My final gift to my family, the truth about the choices I made at the end and why I made them. Daniel shifted position again in his hospital bed, his movement suggesting increasing discomfort despite his determination to continue recording. A nurse appeared briefly in the frame, adjusting something out of view before disappearing again. 2 months before this recording, Daniel continued, my oncology team presented me with a final treatment option, an experimental protocol that had shown modest results in extending life for patients with advanced pancreatic cancer. The potential benefit was an additional 3 to 6 months of life. The certain cost was increased suffering from side effects, more time in hospital settings, and significant cognitive impairment from the treatment's neurotoxicity. He paused, his expression grave. As a physician, I'd seen countless patients and families choose quantity of time over quality, often with devastating consequences for everyone involved. I made a different choice, one that Margaret supported, but that I never fully explained to my daughters. In the living room, both Sarah and Ellie leaned forward unconsciously, sensing they were approaching the heart of their father's message. I declined the experimental treatment, Daniel stated simply. Instead, I chose palliative care focused on pain management and maintaining cognitive clarity for as long as possible. This decision meant accepting a shorter lifespan, but ensured I remained present and aware during my final months. Margaret nodded almost imperceptibly, clearly familiar with this part of the story. Sarah, Ellie, Daniel addressed his daughters directly. You may have wondered why I seemed to decline so rapidly after that final Christmas we spent together. Why I transitioned to hospice care seemingly overnight. It wasn't because my condition suddenly worsened. It was the natural progression I had anticipated and accepted months earlier. Sarah's breath caught audibly. He knew during Christmas, when we were all opening presents and he was telling stories about his residency, he knew exactly how little time was left. On screen, Daniel seemed to anticipate this reaction. I recognize this revelation may cause pain, perhaps even anger. You might feel I deceived you by maintaining such normalcy when I knew my time was so limited. From my perspective, that final Christmas, watching you both laughing together, seeing the family united without the shadow of imminent loss, was the greatest gift you could have given me. He smiled sadly. I didn't want our last holiday overshadowed by goodbyes. I wanted it filled with the ordinary joy that has always been this family's strength. Ellie reached for a tissue, tears flowing freely now. She remembered that Christmas clearly, how her father had seemed more present than he had in months, insisting on preparing his famous pancakes despite his weakness, leading them in carols at the old piano. There's more to this decision that you deserve to understand, Daniel continued. The experimental treatment would have severely impacted my cognitive function, the mental clarity needed to complete the oncology wing plans, to arrange for your future genetic counseling, to create this very message. His expression grew more intense. I chose lucid, meaningful final months over potentially confused, suffering additional time. It was the most difficult medical decision of my career, but I've never regretted it. Every moment of awareness was precious, allowing me to complete the projects that mattered most, to say the goodbyes I needed to say, to ensure my family would have resources for whatever challenges might come. Margaret spoke softly, addressing her daughters rather than the screen. He wanted to tell you both at the time. I was the one who suggested waiting. Why? Sarah asked, her voice carefully neutral. Because I knew you'd both try to convince him to try the experimental treatment, Margaret admitted. You'd have researched alternatives, sought second opinions, fought against his decision with all your considerable determination. He needed to focus his remaining energy elsewhere. On screen, Daniel seemed to address this very point. If I had shared this decision when I made it, your natural response would have been to fight for more time with me. I understood that impulse. It's born of love. But sometimes the most loving choice is accepting when a battle cannot and should not be won. He leaned forward, his gaze intense despite his evident fatigue. This approach to end-of-life care, prioritizing meaningful time over maximum time, informed every aspect of the oncology wing design. The reflection room you've presumably seen today, the family accommodation suites, the palliative care integration, All reflect my conviction that how we leave this world matters as much as how long we remain in it. Daniel paused, taking several deep breaths before continuing. Now I must address something specific to each of you, beginning with Margaret. He looked directly into the camera, his expression softening with evident love. My dear Margaret, you carried the burden of this knowledge alone, honoring my wishes even when doing so isolated you from our daughters. Your strength during these months has been extraordinary. The letter I've left explains arrangements I've made for your future, but here I want to publicly acknowledge the profound gift of your partnership in this final journey. Margaret wiped tears silently, nodding as if responding directly to her husband. Sarah, Daniel continued, shifting his gaze slightly, your drive and determination have always reminded me of myself, both our greatest strengths and our most challenging traits. My hope for you is that you won't wait until facing death, as I did, to examine what truly matters in life. Success comes in many forms beyond the professional achievements you've so brilliantly pursued. Sarah sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable, though her eyes remained fixed on her father's image. And Ellie, Daniel's voice softened further. You've been my witness through this illness, the one who sat with me through treatments, who asked the difficult questions, who seemed to understand instinctively what I needed even when I couldn't articulate it myself. My fear for you has always been that your capacity for empathy might come at the expense of your own needs and dreams. Ellie nodded through her tears, recognizing the truth in her father's assessment. The letters contain personal messages for each of you, Daniel explained. But there is one final piece of information all of you need to understand together. He straightened slightly, summoning his remaining strength. The genetic mutation I carry doesn't just impact health. It has shaped our family dynamics in ways none of us fully recognized. My awareness of this hereditary risk influenced how I parented, pushing Sarah toward academic and professional excellence that would ensure financial security regardless of future health challenges, encouraging Ellie's nurturing tendencies as a form of family support system. The revelation hung heavy in the air, a new context for understanding patterns that had defined their family for decades. I didn't consciously design your childhoods around this genetic legacy, Daniel clarified. But looking back from this vantage point, I can see how my unspoken fears influenced the roles I encouraged each of you to adopt. That recognition is part of why I'm speaking so openly now, to free you both from patterns established for reasons you never understood. Daniel's exhaustion was becoming evident, his words slightly slower, though no less purposeful. My time is growing short today. I'll continue this message tomorrow if my strength permits. For now, know that every choice I made, from treatment decisions to the timing of this disclosure, was motivated by love, however imperfectly expressed. The screen faded momentarily to black, then returned to show Daniel looking noticeably weaker, the timestamp indicating the following day. When Daniel reappeared on screen, he was sitting in a wheelchair by the window of his hospital room, a blanket draped over his legs, despite the visible sunshine outside. His diminished physical state was apparent, yet his eyes remained clear and focused. "Good morning, my dear ones," he began, his voice softer but still steady. "Thank you for staying with me through this difficult conversation. Today, I want to address something that has remained largely unspoken in our family, the different relationships each of you had with me, and how those differences created both connections and divisions between you." In the living room, the three women exchanged glances. This territory felt particularly sensitive, the unacknowledged tensions and alliances that had shaped their family dynamics for decades. "Margaret and I tried to be fair parents," Daniel continued, "but the reality is that parents connect differently with each child. Sarah, from your earliest days, you and I engaged in a dance of ambition and expectation. I recognized my own drive in you and channeled it, sometimes too forcefully, toward achievements I valued." Sarah shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, the accuracy of her father's assessment evidently striking home. "Ellie, our connection was different, built on shared sensitivity, on observation rather than action. I often relied on your emotional intelligence to smooth family tensions, perhaps burdening you with adult responsibilities before you were ready to bear them." Ellie nodded slightly, having come to similar realizations during her training as a counselor. These different relationships created patterns that extended beyond my interactions with each of you. They influenced how you related to each other, competitive at times, distant at others, with Margaret often caught in the middle, trying to balance the scales. Margaret sighed softly. He always saw everything, even when he didn't acknowledge it directly. Daniel leaned forward in his wheelchair. I remember clearly a moment that crystallized these dynamics. Sarah's 12th birthday party. The one with the swimming pool and all her friends from school. Ellie, you were 9, helping your mother serve cake, standing slightly apart from the celebration. Ellie felt a jolt of recognition, the very memory she had referenced in her speech at the dedication ceremony. After Sarah blew out her candles to much applause, I noticed Ellie's expression, not jealousy exactly, but a kind of resignation to being in the background. Without really thinking about it, I relit one candle and called Ellie over. "This one's for you," I told her. "Everyone deserves their own wish." On screen, Daniel smiled at the recollection. It was a small gesture, but it seemed important somehow, acknowledging both of my daughter's needs in different ways. Sarah had her moment of being the center of attention, which suited her outgoing nature. Ellie had a quieter recognition, more personal, which matched her temperament. Sarah turned to Ellie, surprise evident in her expression. "I don't remember that at all." "I do," Ellie replied softly. "It's one of my clearest memories of Dad." What none of us recognized then, Daniel continued, was how that moment exemplified the different ways each of you needed to be loved. Sarah, you thrived on achievement and recognition, the bright flame of accomplishment. Ellie, you needed quieter acknowledgement, the steady light of being truly seen. He gestured toward the window, where sunlight streamed into his hospital room. Neither need was more valid than the other. The challenge was learning to provide both forms of love in a family system that sometimes pitted these needs against each other. Daniel's nurse appeared briefly again, adjusting something on his IV pole before stepping away. He waited until she had left before continuing. "After my diagnosis, these long-established patterns intensified. Sarah, you processed my illness largely from a distance, throwing yourself into your career, visiting when you could while maintaining the separate life you'd built. This wasn't wrong or unloving. It was consistent with how you'd always handled emotional challenges, through action rather than presence." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, the emotion seemingly catching her by surprise. "Ellie, you took the opposite approach, putting your own life on hold to be physically present, to help with my care, to support your mother. Again, this reflected your established role in the family, the nurturer, the connector, the one who prioritized others' needs." Daniel looked directly into the camera. "What I want you both to understand is that neither response was more valid or loving than the other. You each processed grief in ways consistent with your personalities and our established relationships. The tragedy is that these different approaches created a division between you at the very time you most needed each other's support." In the living room, the sisters glanced at each other, the truth of their father's words impossible to deny. The year of his illness had widened existing gaps between them. Sarah's phone calls becoming less frequent, Ellie's resentment growing with each family occasion Sarah missed due to work commitments. "Margaret," Daniel continued, "you were caught in the middle as always, understanding both daughters' coping mechanisms while managing your own grief. The strength you showed during that time was remarkable, though I know it came at great personal cost." Margaret dabbed at her eyes, the memories of that difficult time clearly still raw. "I share these observations not to assign blame or to reopen old wounds," Daniel clarified, "but to offer context that might help heal divisions that have persisted since my death. The patterns established during my illness seem to have calcified in the years since. Sarah building her life in Chicago, Ellie remaining close to home, limited contact between you beyond obligatory family occasions." The accuracy of his assessment hung in the air between the sisters, uncomfortable but undeniable. "What you perhaps don't realize," Daniel said, his voice growing softer with evident fatigue, "is how similar you actually are beneath these different external responses. You both carry my legacy, not just potentially in your genes, but in your determination, your intelligence, your capacity for compassion when you allow yourselves to express it." He shifted in his wheelchair, wincing slightly with the effort. "My greatest regret is that my illness and death seem to drive you further apart rather than bringing you closer. My hope is that this conversation, however belated, might offer a new foundation for understanding each other." Daniel looked beyond the camera briefly, apparently responding to someone in the room. "I need to rest now. Tomorrow, I'll share my final thoughts and wishes for this family that has been my greatest joy and privilege." The screen faded to black, leaving the three women in silence once more, each absorbing the profound insights Daniel had shared from beyond death. The third segment of Daniel's video began with a different setting. He was back in his hospital bed, noticeably weaker than in previous recordings. A calendar visible on the wall behind him suggested this portion had been filmed just days before his death. "Hello, my dear ones," he began, his voice raspier but determined. The doctors tell me my time is growing quite short now. I've asked to be alert enough today to complete this message to you, my final gift, and perhaps my most important one." Margaret reached for both her daughter's hands, creating a physical connection between the three women as they watched. Throughout these recordings, I've shared difficult truths about my genetic status, my treatment decisions, my observations about our family dynamics. Today, I want to address the future, yours individually and collectively. Daniel adjusted his position slightly, assisted by someone off camera. First, regarding the genetic testing we've discussed. I've arranged for Dr. Kelly to coordinate this process whenever you're ready. The testing itself is straightforward, but the decisions that follow positive results require careful consideration. He looked directly into the camera. Should either of you carry the mutation, please know that this knowledge is power, not a sentence. The medical options available now are far superior to what existed when I first learned of my status. Regular screening, preventative surgeries if you choose them, lifestyle modifications, all significantly reduce risk. Sarah nodded slightly, her analytical mind clearly already processing these practical considerations. Beyond the medical implications, Daniel continued, I want to address how this information might impact your life choices. Sarah, you've mentioned considering children someday. A positive genetic test shouldn't discourage this dream. Genetic counseling can provide options for preventing transmission to the next generation. He shifted his gaze slightly. Ellie, your career working with traumatized children demonstrates your natural caregiving abilities. If you choose to become a parent yourself someday, those same gifts will serve you well, regardless of genetic status. Daniel paused, taking a sip of water before continuing. Now to matters of inheritance and responsibility. The oncology wing you've seen today represents the largest portion of my estate, an investment in continuing the work that defined my career. What remains has been divided equally between you, with provisions for Margaret's lifetime security already established. He smiled slightly. I suspect neither of you will be surprised by this conventional approach to financial matters. What may surprise you is what I'm asking in return. Daniel's expression grew more serious. From Sarah, I ask that you consider joining the hospital's financial advisory board. Your business acumen could help ensure the oncology wing's sustainability. This isn't about obligating you to a cause you haven't chosen, but about inviting you to use your particular gifts in service to something meaningful. Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly, clearly not having anticipated this request. From Ellie, I ask consideration of developing a therapeutic program for siblings of pediatric cancer patients. Your professional training and personal experience as a family member of someone with cancer uniquely qualifies you for this work. Again, this is an invitation, not an obligation. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his intensity palpable despite his weakened state. But my most important request involves your relationship with each other. The distance that has grown between you brings me profound sadness. Sisters should not be strangers to each other, especially when facing the possibility of shared genetic challenges. In the living room, the sisters exchanged uncomfortable glances, the truth of their father's words impossible to deny. I'm not asking for artificial closeness or pretending past hurts don't exist, Daniel clarified. I'm asking for something more fundamental, a commitment to remain in each other's lives in meaningful ways, to support each other through whatever health challenges may come, to remember that the bond of shared history and shared blood matters, especially when facing medical uncertainties. Margaret squeezed both daughters' hands. Your father worried about this constantly in his final months, that his illness had somehow broken something essential between you. On screen, Daniel seemed to gather his remaining strength. Now I must address something difficult. The anger you may feel toward me. Anger about genetic secrets kept, about treatment decisions made without full family consultation, about the uneven ways I may have distributed my attention and approval throughout your lives. His expression reflected genuine remorse. That anger is valid. I made choices based on what I believed was right at the time, but I recognize the pain those choices may have caused. I ask not for absolution, but for understanding that even flawed decisions came from a place of deep love. Daniel's breathing had become more labored, his fatigue evident. In your individual letters, you'll find personal messages I couldn't bring myself to speak aloud even in this format. They contain apologies, acknowledgments, and affirmations specific to each of you. He looked beyond the camera briefly, nodding to someone off-screen before returning his attention to his final message. As a physician, I've witnessed countless family dynamics during crisis. Those who fare best are not the ones without conflict or pain, but those who choose connection despite these challenges. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, his composure finally breaking. My dearest wish is that you'll choose connection, with each other, with the truth, with the parts of yourselves that reflect my best qualities rather than my failures. He took a moment to compose himself, wiping his eyes with a tissue offered by someone off camera. The candle ritual from Sarah's birthday all those years ago has stayed with me as a powerful metaphor. Each of you deserves your own light, your own moment to shine. But remember that candles can also share their flame without diminishing their own brightness. Daniel smiled then, a genuine expression that momentarily transformed his gaunt face into a reminder of the vital man he had once been. I love you all beyond words. Whatever choices you make after hearing these messages, know that my pride in each of you is boundless. My gratitude for our time together immeasurable. He raised his hand in a small wave, the effort clearly taking his remaining strength. Goodbye, my dear ones. Light candles for each other. That's how we keep the darkness at bay. The screen faded to black for the final time. In the living room, the three Matthews women sat in silence, hands still joined, the full weight of Daniel's posthumous messages settling around them. The silence in the living room extended for several minutes after Daniel's final message ended. Outside, afternoon had shifted toward evening, shadows lengthening across the familiar space. Margaret finally released her daughter's hands, reaching for the wooden box that contained their individual letters. I think it's time, she said quietly, removing the 3 envelopes and distributing them. Each bore their name in Daniel's distinctive handwriting, the careful script of a doctor accustomed to making his notes legible. Should we read them privately? Sarah asked, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. Margaret considered the question. Daniel never specified. I think he would understand if you both need privacy for this. Ellie looked down at her envelope, then at her sister and mother. I'd like to stay here if that's okay. We've heard so much together already. Sarah nodded slowly. I'll stay too. They opened their envelopes carefully, each unfolding pages filled with Daniel's handwriting. The room fell silent again as they began to read their private messages. Occasional tears or soft inhalations the only sounds. Ellie's letter began with her father's characteristic directness. My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, you've watched my recorded messages and know the truths I kept hidden during my life. This letter contains what I couldn't bring myself to say aloud, the most personal gift I can offer you. From the moment you were born, I recognized something in you that both moved and frightened me. A sensitivity to others' emotional states that mirrored qualities I had suppressed in myself to become the doctor and man society expected. I saw how naturally you absorbed others' pain, how intuitively you responded to unspoken needs. What I never told you was how much I admired this quality, even as I worried about its cost to you. In my generation, particularly for men, such sensitivity was considered weakness. I channeled mine into medical practice, where empathy could be professionally justified. But you embraced yours openly, authentically, without the shields I constructed. The birthday candle moment you may remember, when I relit one just for you during Sarah's celebration, was not simply a father being kind. It was recognition of a kindred spirit, acknowledgement of the quiet observer, witnessing others' joy while standing slightly apart. I saw myself in you then, Ellie, the self I might have been had I possessed your courage. During my illness, you demonstrated extraordinary compassion, sitting with me through treatments, engaging honestly with medical realities, creating space for difficult conversations. What you couldn't have known was how healing your presence was, not just for my body, but for the parts of my spirit damaged by decades of emotional restraint. Now I must address your future, particularly regarding genetic testing. Your natural inclination may be to postpone this knowledge, to prioritize others' needs before addressing your own health concerns. I urge you not to delay. Your compassion for others begins with caring properly for yourself. Whatever the test results, remember that you are more than genetic code. You are the gentle strength that sustained our family through crisis, the moral compass that challenged my medical detachment, the heart that taught me to value connection above achievement in my final days. My deepest regret is that I sometimes treated your sensitivity as secondary to Sarah's ambition, reinforcing a hierarchy of traits that reflected my own damaged values. The truth is that your emotional intelligence represents the highest form of human capacity, the ability to truly see others, to create belonging, to hold space for both joy and suffering. As you move forward, I hope you'll pursue your own dreams with the same determination you've shown in supporting others. The foundation I've established includes specific funds for your continued education or professional development, not because I found your current path lacking, but because I want you to have every opportunity to grow in whatever direction calls to you. Finally, about your relationship with Sarah. Please don't allow my illness and death to permanently separate you from your sister. Your differences have always been complementary rather than contradictory. She needs your emotional awareness. You benefit from her practical strength. Together, you possess the complete set of tools to face whatever challenges may come, including potential genetic concerns. I love you, Ellie, not for what you do for others, but for who you are. My compassionate, perceptive daughter who helped me rediscover my own humanity when I needed it most. All my love, Dad. Ellie looked up from her letter to find both her mother and sister similarly absorbed in their messages. Sarah's face reflected complex emotions, pain, surprise, and something that looked like resolution. Margaret wiped tears quietly, carefully refolding her pages. When all three had finished reading, they placed their letters on the coffee table, the physical manifestations of Daniel's final communications with each of them. "He knew us so well," Sarah said finally, breaking the silence. "Better than I realized." Margaret nodded. "Daniel always observed carefully, even when he didn't express what he saw. He asked me to consider genetic testing soon," Ellie shared, looking directly at her sister. "What about you?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "The same. He was quite insistent about not delaying." A moment of understanding passed between the sisters, the first truly direct communication they'd shared since arriving. "Would you want to do it together?" Ellie asked carefully. "The testing, I mean, if that would be easier." Sarah considered the question, her habitual defensiveness momentarily absent. "I think, yes, that might be good." Margaret watched her daughters with cautious hope. "Dr. Kelly said he could arrange appointments whenever you're ready." "I need to be back in Chicago on Monday," Sarah said automatically, then paused, reconsidering. "But I suppose I could talk to Jason about extending my trip a few days, if the hospital can accommodate us quickly." "I'm sure they can," Margaret replied. "Your father arranged everything in advance. He was always planning 3 steps ahead." Both sisters finished simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise before sharing a small, genuine smile. As evening settled around the house, Margaret stood. "I should start dinner. You both must be exhausted after today." "Let me help," Ellie offered automatically. "Actually," Sarah interjected, "why don't we order something? Give you a break, Mom." She glanced at Ellie. "Maybe we could look at those journals Mom mentioned earlier, the ones from Dad's final year." The suggestion, Sarah voluntarily engaging with their father's illness rather than maintaining emotional distance, represented a subtle but significant shift. "They're in his study," Margaret said, carefully neutral despite the hope evident in her eyes. "I'll call for takeout while you two look through them." As the sisters moved toward their father's study, Ellie paused at the family photos lining the hallway. One in particular caught her attention. Daniel holding infant Ellie while 3-year-old Sarah peered curiously at her new sister. Their father looked younger, unburdened, his expression one of simple joy. "I remember when he got sick," Sarah said quietly, stopping beside Ellie. "How he made us promise not to treat him differently, to keep arguing and laughing and living normally around him." Ellie nodded. "He hated being treated like a patient by his family. I thought I was respecting his wishes by continuing my normal life in Chicago," Sarah admitted, "by not hovering or appearing worried when I visited." "I know," Ellie replied. "And I thought I was helping by being here constantly, managing his medications, taking notes during doctor visits." They studied the photograph together, seeing their father through new eyes, not just as the patriarch who had shaped their childhood, or the patient whose illness had revealed family fault lines, but as a complex human being navigating impossible choices. "We were both right," Sarah said finally, "and both wrong, just like him." The simple acknowledgement that their different responses to crisis contained both wisdom and limitation felt like the first brick removed from a wall long standing between them. "Dad's journals are on the bottom shelf," Ellie said, moving toward the study door. "He wrote almost every day, even when he was really sick." Sarah followed, her professional armor temporarily set aside. "Then we'd better get started. We have a lot of catching up to do." 3 days later, the Matthews women sat in Dr. Kelly's office at Cleveland Memorial Hospital, the morning sunlight streaming through vertical blinds, creating alternating patterns of light and shadow across the consultation room. On the desk between them lay 2 sealed envelopes containing genetic test results, one for Sarah, one for Ellie. The sisters had spent the intervening days in a delicate dance of reconnection, reading their father's journals together in the evenings, sharing meals without the usual protective barriers of polite conversation, even visiting the lake house where they had spent childhood summers, now closed up but still filled with family memories. Margaret watched her daughters carefully, noting the subtle shifts in their interaction. Less careful distance, more genuine engagement. Not a complete transformation, but a beginning. Dr. Kelly entered the consultation room, his professional demeanor tempered with the compassion Daniel had evidently seen in him as a mentee. He carried a tablet with patient files and sat across from the three women, offering a reassuring smile. "Thank you all for coming today," he began. "Before we discuss your results, I want to acknowledge what a significant step this is. Many people choose not to pursue genetic testing, particularly so soon after learning about familial risk." Sarah straightened in her chair, her business persona partially reasserting itself. "We decided not to delay. Our father was quite clear about the benefits of early information." Dr. Kelly nodded. "He was indeed. Daniel and I had many conversations about the ethical implications of genetic knowledge, the responsibility of having information versus the burden of carrying it." He gestured to the envelopes. "As we discussed during your pre-test counseling, these results will tell us whether either of you carries the specific BRCA2 mutation identified in your father's genetic profile. A positive result doesn't guarantee development of cancer, but it does indicate significantly elevated risk requiring enhanced surveillance and consideration of preventative measures." Ellie reached for her mother's hand. "We understand. Would you prefer to open these privately?" "Doctor," Kelly asked. "Some families choose to review results separately before discussing them together." The sisters exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We'd like to open them together," Sarah answered for both of them. "Whatever the results, we've agreed to face this as a family." Dr. Kelly smiled slightly. "Your father would be pleased to hear that." He pushed the envelopes toward them. "Whenever you're ready." Sarah reached for her envelope first, her normally steady hands betraying a slight tremor. Ellie followed suit, both sisters breaking the seals simultaneously. The room fell silent as they unfolded their results, each scanning the medical terminology for the essential information. Margaret held her breath, watching their faces for clues. Sarah spoke first, her voice carefully controlled. "I'm positive for the mutation." She looked up at Dr. Kelly, immediately seeking information rather than dwelling on emotion. "What exactly does this mean for surveillance protocols?" Before he could answer, Ellie spoke softly. "I'm negative." She looked at her sister, a complicated mix of relief and concern crossing her face. "Sarah, I'm so sorry." Sarah shook her head slightly. "Don't be. We knew there was a 50-50 chance for each of us. At least you're clear." Dr. Kelly allowed them a moment to absorb the disparate results before addressing Sarah's question. "For BRCA2 carriers, we recommend comprehensive surveillance beginning immediately. Enhanced breast imaging, regular ovarian screening, pancreatic protocols given your father's specific cancer type." He tapped his tablet, bringing up detailed medical information. "There are also preventative surgical options to consider, though those decisions don't need to be made immediately. Many carriers choose to complete family planning before pursuing those options." Sarah nodded, already processing the information with her characteristic efficiency. "And the implications for—" She hesitated briefly. "For future children? Pre-implantation genetic diagnosis is an option if you choose to have biological children," Dr. Kelly explained. "It allows selection of embryos without the mutation before implantation." Margaret reached for Sarah's hand. "Whatever you decide, we'll support you completely." Sarah accepted her mother's hand but looked toward Ellie, something vulnerable breaking through her composed exterior. "I didn't expect to feel this marked, like I'm carrying something invisible but powerful." Ellie moved her chair closer to her sisters, their shoulders touching. "You're not carrying it alone. Your negative status doesn't exclude you from this conversation, Ellie," Dr. Kelly noted gently. "Supporting a family member through these decisions can be its own challenge." Ellie nodded. "I know. Dad prepared me for that possibility in his letter." Sarah took a deep breath, visibly gathering herself. "So, what happens next?" Dr. Kelly outlined immediate steps. Additional consultations, scheduling baseline screenings, connecting with support resources for mutation carriers. Throughout his explanation, the sisters maintained their physical connection, shoulders touching in silent support. When the medical discussion concluded, Dr. Kelly closed his tablet and regarded the three women with genuine compassion. "I knew your father well during his final months. He spoke often about his hopes for his family after he was gone." "What did he say?" Margaret asked softly. that his greatest wish wasn't for a building with his name on it, or for medical breakthroughs, though he valued those things, Dr. Kelly replied. It was for his daughters to face whatever came next as each other's strongest allies, not distant relations. Sarah looked at Ellie, something shifting in her expression. He always could see around corners, couldn't he? Planning for what we might need before we knew we needed it. The candles, Ellie said simply. Sarah nodded, understanding the reference. One for each of us, but from the same flame. As they prepared to leave the consultation room, Dr. Kelly handed Sarah a business card. This is the contact information for our BRCA support group. Monthly meetings, both in-person and virtual options. Sarah stared at the card momentarily before slipping it into her wallet. Thank you. I'll consider it. Outside in the hospital corridor, Margaret excused herself to make a phone call, leaving the sisters alone for a moment. I need to head back to Chicago tomorrow, Sarah said, her practical nature reasserting itself. Jason's been covering for me, but there's a client presentation Monday I can't miss. Ellie nodded, the familiar disappointment starting to surface. The pattern of connection followed by separation that had defined their adult relationship. But then Sarah continued, surprising her. I was thinking, though, maybe you could come visit next month. See my place? Meet Jason properly? We could look at those surveillance specialists Dr. Kelly recommended at Northwestern. The invitation, casual in delivery but significant in meaning, hung between them. I'd like that, Ellie replied simply. Very much. As they walked toward the hospital exit where their mother waited, Sarah spoke again, her voice quieter. Do you remember what Dad used to say about birthday candles? That the wish only comes true if you keep it to yourself? Ellie nodded. He was very strict about that rule. I never told anyone what I wished for at that birthday party, the one where he relit the candle for you. What was it? Ellie asked, curious despite herself. Sarah smiled slightly, the expression softening her professional demeanor. I wished that I could be brave like Dad. I thought that meant becoming a doctor or doing something important. She shook her head. Now I wonder if true bravery might be something else entirely. As they pushed through the hospital doors into the spring sunshine, Ellie understood what her sister wasn't quite saying. That facing genetic risk, reconsidering priorities, rebuilding their relationship after years of distance, required a different kind of courage than professional achievement. I think, Ellie said carefully, that Dad would say bravery comes in different forms for different moments. Sometimes it's fighting, sometimes it's accepting, sometimes it's simply showing up when it would be easier to stay away. Sarah considered this, then nodded, like relighting candles that have gone out. Exactly like that, Ellie agreed, as they walked together toward their mother, the space between them noticeably smaller than it had been just days before. 1 year later, the Matthews family gathered again in Cleveland, though under vastly different circumstances. The dining room of Margaret's home bustled with activity as Sarah arranged flowers in a crystal vase while Ellie set the table with their grandmother's china. Is Jason bringing the wine? Margaret called from the kitchen, where delicious aromas suggested hours of preparation. He's picking it up on his way from the airport, Sarah confirmed, adjusting a lily stem with practiced precision. His flight from Chicago lands at 4, so he should be here by 5:30. Ellie placed the last fork and stepped back to admire their handiwork. Mom, are you sure you don't want us to order food instead? This is a lot of work just for a test result. Margaret appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. This isn't just about your 6-month all clear, Ellie. It's about celebrating a year of changes for all of us. The past 12 months had indeed brought significant transformations for the Matthews women. Sarah had thrown herself into cancer advocacy with the same determination she'd previously reserved for corporate advancement, joining the hospital board her father had suggested, and establishing a corporate partnership program that had already raised substantial funds for genetic research. Her relationship with Jason had deepened as she shared her BRCA status and its implications. His supportive response had surprised her, not minimizing the challenges ahead, but committing to face them together. They'd begun preliminary discussions with fertility specialists about future family planning that would incorporate genetic testing. Ellie had developed the support program for siblings of pediatric cancer patients that Daniel had envisioned, drawing on both her professional training and personal experience. The initiative had proven so successful that several other hospitals had adopted her curriculum. Most significantly, the sisters' relationship had evolved from obligatory holiday phone calls to genuine connection. Sarah had visited Cleveland monthly for her enhanced screening protocols, often extending her trips to include time with Ellie and Margaret. Ellie had spent several weekends in Chicago, getting to know Sarah's world and friends there. "The table looks beautiful," Margaret observed, genuine pleasure in her voice. "Your father would love seeing us all together like this." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Ellie opened it to find Dr. Kelly standing on the porch, a bottle of champagne in hand. "Hope I'm not too early," he said, stepping inside. Hospital meetings finished sooner than expected. His inclusion in their family gathering reflected another evolution of the past year. Initially their medical liaison, Jason Kelly had gradually become something more. A connection to Daniel, certainly, but also a friend in his own right. His gentle guidance through Sarah's surveillance protocols and genuine interest in the family's well-being had earned him a place in their reconstructed circle. Jason called from the airport, Sarah informed him, taking the champagne. "He's running on time for once. Something about tailwinds." "Excellent," Dr. Kelly replied. "I'm looking forward to meeting him properly. Your father spoke highly of him, you know." Sarah raised her eyebrows. "Dad knew Jason? From where?" "They met at a medical conference in Chicago about 3 years ago," Dr. Kelly explained. Jason's healthcare investment work overlapped with some of Daniel's research interests. He mentioned being impressed with both his financial acumen and his ethical approach to medical funding. Sarah absorbed this information with evident surprise. "He never told me they'd met." "Your father had a habit of quietly observing the important people in his daughters' lives," Margaret commented from the doorway. "He did the same with Ellie's graduate school mentors." The conversation paused as they moved to the living room, where photographs of Daniel now mingled comfortably with newer images. Sarah receiving an advocacy award, Ellie with her first group of program participants. The sisters together at the lake house they had reopened last summer. Dr. Kelly noticed a new addition, a professional portrait of the 3 Matthews women taken at the hospital's fundraising gala 6 months earlier. "This is a wonderful photograph," he commented. "You all look so happy." "It was a good night," Margaret agreed. "The first time it felt like we were moving forward rather than just coping with loss." The sound of a car in the driveway signaled Jason's arrival. Sarah moved to the window, watching as her boyfriend of 3 years gathered bags from the rental car. "There he is," she said, a softness in her voice that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. As the family assembled to welcome their final guest, Ellie caught her sister's eye. "Happy Relit Candle Day," she said quietly, referencing the private name they'd given to this anniversary. Sarah smiled, understanding the multiple layers of meaning in her sister's words. "Same to you, though technically yours never went out." "Maybe not," Ellie acknowledged, "but it burns brighter with company." The doorbell rang again, and Sarah moved to answer it, pausing briefly to squeeze Ellie's hand, a silent acknowledgement of how far they'd come and the journey still ahead. Margaret watched her daughters with quiet satisfaction. Daniel's final gift to his family hadn't been the genetic information, important as that was. It had been the honest conversation that allowed them to rebuild connections that would sustain them through whatever challenges the future might hold. As Jason entered amid warm greetings and introductions, the Matthews home filled with the comfortable sounds of family gathering, conversations overlapping, glasses clinking, genuine laughter emerging without effort. In the dining room, candles waited to be lit for the celebration dinner. Not just one for the birthday person, but one for each family member and guest. It had become their new tradition over the past year, inspired by Daniel's long-ago gesture and the wisdom they had finally understood within it. Everyone deserved their own light, their own moment to shine. But candles clustered together burned more brightly, kept darkness further at bay, created warmth that no single flame could generate alone. Outside, spring rain began to fall gently, nourishing the yellow roses Margaret had planted in Daniel's memory. Inside, his family continued the work of healing, not by forgetting the past, but by carrying its lessons forward with greater wisdom and deeper connection than they had managed before. It wasn't the family story Daniel had originally envisioned for them, but perhaps it was the one they had always been moving toward. Separate candles, individual lights, but part of the same essential flame. As our story, at my sister's birthday, she blew out all the candles, then my father relit one just for me, comes to a close, I invite you to reflect on the themes we've explored together in this emotional family journey. Like the Matthews family, many of us navigate complicated relationships with siblings and parents, often shaped by unspoken patterns and expectations established long ago. The simple gesture of relighting a candle, ensuring everyone has their moment to shine, serves as a powerful metaphor for how small acts of recognition can heal family dynamics and forge deeper connections. Daniel's posthumous messages to his family remind us that it's never too late for honesty, for understanding, for reconnection with those we love. Even in loss, there are opportunities for growth and healing if we're willing to face difficult truths together. If this story resonated with you, consider how the candles in your own life might be distributed. Are there relationships that could benefit from the kind of honest communication the Matthews family finally achieved? Are there siblings, parents, or children who might need their own candle relit? I'd love to hear your thoughts on how this story connected with your experiences. Have you witnessed how family health challenges can either divide or unite? Have you discovered truths about your family only after loss created the space for honesty? Subscribe for more stories that explore the complicated, beautiful territory of family relationships, the secrets we keep thinking they protect those we love, and the healing that comes when truth finally emerges. Until next time, remember that we all deserve our moment to make a wish, our chance to shine, and that sharing our light with others doesn't diminish our own flame, but creates a warmth and brightness that no one can achieve alone.